humans. Welcome to The Frontline, a leadership and business podcast brought to you by Peregrine Corporate Services, an Isle of Man-based fiduciary provider. My name is Martin Hall, and thanks for listening. In this podcast, we chat to an array of business leaders from different sectors to learn more about them, their market, skill sets and knowledge. We hope you enjoy. Today I'm joined by Greg and David. Thanks for joining us today, guys.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us, Martin. It's good to be with you.
Pleasure to be here, Martin.
Pleasure. So perhaps for our listeners to provide a little bit of background to your respective selves, maybe I'll start with you, Greg. Where did you initially grow up and your early schooling years?
I was born in Bedford and spent the first sort of 10 years of my life in a small town called Saffron Walden, not too far from Cambridge. And then my family moved over to the Isle of Man in 1995, so carried on schooling here at Castle Rushen. Right.
And did you get onto a higher education?
Yeah, I did. So I actually did a trip around a couple of different universities. So I was at York for a while and then Aberdeen.
Yeah. Okay. Studying?
Read anthropology.
Oh, and that is?
So it's sort of really the study of cultures, and actually it's something that sort of carried on a little bit in work and sort of looking at different business cultures, which fits in nicely when you're in business development and spend a lot of time in different corners of the world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Might dig in. Well, we'll definitely dig into that. And what about yourself, David?
Mine's a little bit similar than Greg's. Obviously I'm from a place called Newcastle upon Tyne, by my accent. And I was educated King Edward School it was, and I went there, and then I joined one of the banks. I joined, if anyone remember, TSB Bank at the age of 16. I left college and joined what was supposed to be a job for life back in the day in a bank.
Right.
With them for 30 years.
Right. And obviously for those listening, David, you're obviously down in South Africa at the moment, and Greg, you're on the Isle of Man. I was going to say that's the reason we're on Zoom, but obviously with the general climate anyway, meetings are more and more difficult anyway, although we're quite fortunate, I guess, in the Isle of Man. So you're obviously both with Capital International. So maybe just give a quick overview again, if we go in the same order, just of your respective roles.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. So I'm very much focused on the investment side of the business. So my main day-to-day role is business development for our discretionary investment team. So working with trustees, corporate service providers, and institutional clients to provide capital's range of investment solutions.
Okay, and obviously you should be traveling, I'm sure, a lot more than but Isle of Man based primarily.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually sat down in our Castletown office. So we've got Douglas and Castletown offices, and whereas David's down in our South Africa office.
Yes.
Yeah.
David, yeah.
So myself, I'm the commercial director for Capital International in South Africa, and my role primarily is building the presence of Capital International, not only in South Africa, but in the wider Africa, and that's on a business-to-business relationship. I'm also heavily involved with the operational side of the business because initially we only had 4 staff when I came to South Africa, and we now got nearly 30. So it was sort of build the business and also support the operational side of things.
So one of the things I wanted to dig into, and it's kind of on that general subject, when you've obviously been down there from early stages, the growth of that and bringing that culture of that business culture from the Isle of Man down there, and then the dynamics of the cultures down there. How have you found in the development of the business finding that balance to continue to bring the right ethos to the business and that balance?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's not that difficult. The first and foremost thing that when I joined Capital was knowing that they were committed to South Africa, because you've got to have an office, I believe, in country, because it then supports the clients you're dealing with and their advisors and their fiduciaries or intermediaries. And then the staff understand it. It is a challenge because you've got remote working But the culture that we've developed and I've developed, I was here previously with another company, and I actually recruited some of the staff that used to work for them that had been retrenched, who understand the culture of UK work, and because it is different in South Africa, the way we work is different. I always say that, we always think the glass is half empty because we're always worried what might happen. We're in the UK, kind of always looking forward.
Right.
Yeah, there is different challenges, but it's actually, they're exciting because you're kind of you're an emerging market, so it's an exciting because you can do things or get things done a lot quicker because it tends to be not as much bureaucracy or red tape. If you have an idea, as long as it fits the rules and regulations, you can implement it because you're a smaller team.
Yeah, right. And from an Isle of Man perspective, Greg, when you see that, I know you've been with the firm less time than David. How do you see that? Do you see the different cultures just from your side within the business, albeit perhaps they're not as big a culture differences because you're ultimately under one banner? But do you see that from your side?
I think one thing that Capital International is very strong on is serving international clients wherever they are, and we've got quite a big book of clients growing in Latin America as well, and I think a lot of clients are looking for a jurisdiction that's safe, secure. It's almost their plan B, and to a large extent we see that with the South African clients where they like having the team on the ground, but they want to have their investment management from the Isle of Man. But we also see that for clients that we're serving in lots of different jurisdictions. I think one of the other areas that we do see sort of the sort of element of emerging markets is when we're working with trustees and corporate service providers where their clients are in emerging markets. And I think there is a sort of an ethos within Capital that will look at clients wherever they are, and we acknowledge you can have good clients in bad jurisdictions. We recently onboarded a client that is based in Zambia and very much a low-risk client in many ways, but he was able to open an investment account with us during lockdown as it happened using selfie certification, and I think he may have struggled with more sort of some managers that perhaps don't have that sort of broader perception of the international landscape.
And just to go back to that point, David, where you talk about and perhaps people that have got businesses and are looking to expand to, obviously, I guess ultimately it's also sector related, but where ultimately you're looking to expand into other jurisdictions, you feel that footprint's a very, very important part of that, I guess, and having that presence, constant presence.
Yeah, I've worked in an office where we had a presence in South Africa, and then we left, and I ran it from the Channel Islands, and although the business continued, it didn't have the same growth because when you're in country, you understand the political, the economic situation that we are in. A lot of South Africans, they've seen what's happening in places like Zimbabwe and other Africa, and they've been touched by that, and they want to know that you're living and breathing and understand exactly what they go through. The one thing we spend a lot of time on initially was educating the Isle of Man. Whereas in South Africa, we still have exchange controls, so you can't just say I want to transfer money. You've got to get permissions, and there's limits. And that's kind of alien to the UK and first world countries' exchange controls.
Yeah.
And I think it's an interesting point from an investment perspective as well. To add to that, Martin, that often clients in emerging markets are used to having high interest rates at home and might have still 90% of their wealth invested domestically. But what we have seen recently with interest rates coming down, you take Brazil as an example again, their interest rates came down from 14, 15% down to 2% now. So there is that element of wealthy individuals in emerging markets helping them to establish and manage an international portfolio. And you see when you do have sort of shocks in markets like we saw in Q1 this year, that actually that's felt a lot harder if you're a client in an emerging market currency. And I think that's one of the things that Capital does well is assist clients with their circumstances, whether that is sort of preservation of capital, or whether it's longer term focus on capital growth. I think one of the other areas that I see a lot on the investment side is maybe clients that have been in emerging markets that have perhaps been a little bit naive when it comes to international investments. So quite a lot of our work often will be doing a portfolio review on an existing portfolio where maybe they've got challenges with illiquid assets or something esoteric, and trying to then guide them towards a suitable investment strategy that will serve them well for the long term.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So to come back to, and it's quite an open question, but I know you mentioned there about selfie certs, and it kind of reminds, I suppose, people in business, and certainly the time we're going through, again, we're in the Isle of Man, we're perhaps in a slightly more fortunate situation now with COVID, perhaps certainly less so than South Africa, but business is adapting, and perhaps not specifically focusing on the changes in COVID, but something I notice as an observer of CRG, we've got a business relationship as well, is that the business is very adaptable. So again, I guess there's two boards, one in South Africa, one in the Isle of Man, and that ability to adapt. So when you first look at how COVID implemented, I know now you're doing webinars and again, trying to reach an audience in a different circumstance. How have you found that adaptability and things perhaps that listeners could learn from your guys' respective experiences? And I suppose at a very different time, we're recording this now, mid-August 2020. So again, respectively where you sat, the position is very different.
Yeah, I'll pick part of that up. Yeah, it is, because we've kind of got two camps, if you want to say. The Isle of Man is really out of COVID and business as usual. We're in South Africa, we're still on lockdown, social distancing, minimum numbers into offices. So it's kind of, you've got to be conscious of over the Isle of Man, it's kind of business as usual, but we're still working from home. But actually, we had a case on this last week where we allowed electronic signatures during lockdown, and then somebody asked us, "Can you continue this in the future?" So it's being able to adapt and using the efficiencies in that, because just because we used it for a set purpose, COVID, and Isle of Man's coming out of COVID, doesn't mean we should then stop using them, like selfies, like electronic signatures, and everything like Zoom. I did a webinar recently on what does face-to-face look like now. Ask your client that, what do they want? It's just face-to-face. And I used to love face-to-face meetings, but I can do a lot more during the day. I don't need to see everybody, face-to-face. I don't have the traffic that I normally have to deal with. So I've actually got time in my diary to do other things that probably I was doing at night.
Yeah.
I think, David, part of that is you've built up relationships over many years, and actually if you know them well enough, doesn't matter where they are, if you can dial in and do a Teams meeting with them, it's the next best thing to being able to go and sit down and do an actual face-to-face. Yeah,
and a good point, you can get key and critical contacts all together a lot easier. What it's like, you're trying to get, an MD, an FD, or whoever, a CIO, at the same time. The diaries are normally, or they're in different places, whereas you can say, right, Monday morning, 8 o'clock, let's get it in the diary, we can all Zoom in, and you can have that meeting very quickly before the week started.
Yeah, and I think decisions often get made far quicker because you don't have that element of, you have your meeting, you then go back to your base and then do your follow-up and wait for a response from the prospective client. And we had that earlier in the year, Martin. It's without going into any details, we had a institutional client that was using us for some services, mainly on the cash management side, and we'd met with their sort of private office in Singapore in November around a STEP conference that we were attending, and we were fortunate enough to be pitching for a very sizable discretionary mandate to manage an equity only portfolio. And we hadn't got all of the paperwork in at that stage. So by the time we had completed all the paperwork, it was just coming into that point of not being able to do face-to-face meetings and having to do everything remotely. So in many ways, it's kind of almost been business as usual for us, because you'll have your relationships in different jurisdictions that you're serving, but we've always had to have a strong reliance on being able to do things digitally. And that case was an interesting one from an investment perspective as well. So we sort of received the cash in, which was sort of in the tens of millions, and the mandate was equity only. So we had to start allocating in a falling market. I have to sort of give a lot of credit to our head of equity to actually have the strength to be able to do that and to stick to the mandate. And we've now come out. We've sort of seen the recovery in Q2, and it just sort of highlights the challenges in the environment that we've just experienced, but also the strength of relationships that you need to have with your clients, whether they're in the Isle of Man, Channel Islands, South Africa, Asia, and I think that's what Capital is sort of really has a strong focus on, is having that depth of relationship with their clients, but on a digital footing. All of the kind of processes that you'll have experienced with Capital, it doesn't matter where you're sat, you should get that same sort of relationship experience, but also the same sort of digital experience.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that sort of strikes out of that dialogue is certainly when you were saying, David, about that potential to line up senior people at the same time and have a meeting. And again, you go back to the position you guys are in, where you're in pretty much lockdown, or very much lockdown at the moment. But that positive attitude, this is I guess that resonates through the business. But it's a challenging time. There's actually opportunities here, which is to get, in that example, 3 senior people sat around a table at once, which perhaps I normally wouldn't be able to get done.
I think it's an interesting point. As an independently owned business, clients do get far better direct access to key decision makers, whether that's David down in South Africa on a sort of a new business transaction and trying to get accounts open in the Isle of Man for them, or whether it's on the investment side. I mean, our investment committee, we always have a morning dial-in, which we always do on Teams, but that carried on without any disruption whatsoever throughout the whole period, and it enabled us to sort of know exactly where we were in our investment thinking, but also for clients to know. And we probably over communicated at the start of lockdown to clients to say, look, everything's okay. We're looking after your portfolios and your interests. And through that whole period, I think we lost one account, which I think is sort of a mark of having that ability to communicate to your clients when you get challenging market environments.
Just to add on that, it's not, one point that we picked up over here is, it's not just about senior staff. If you think about, if you've got your, let's call it your administration team all in one office, and somebody's trying to do a task and they're not sure, they've got somebody that they can call on or ask. However, if that person's at home working by themselves, it's a little bit more difficult. So what we did, we were proactive and went out to all of these teams and said, right, we're going to create, we called it a how to transact or how to deal document, what covered everything from onboarding to applications to investments. And it was kind of just a reminder on how to do things with links or numbers or email addresses, just so we could support them, because we were conscious you've probably got a team of, let's say, 10 in 10 different locations, and difficult for the manager of that team to ensure everybody's doing their role, or if they need support or help. So we try to be proactive and say, how can we make this and how can we give documents out there to support them and answer the questions before they get raised?
Yeah, I think that was the one thing we noticed in our business as well. Like you say, when you're in that group chat that you'd normally have, or one-on-one chat, but there's 5 or 10 others ears around you listening to it, you've kind of lost that ability in when everyone's working separately. So yeah, trying to keep that link being so important, and will be, because I'm sure working from home will become more and more part of the way of life, I guess, going forward.
Yeah, and one of our, just as an example, we've got one of our introducers who's got 50 something advisors who cover all of Africa. So it's kind of, they would normally just go to their central office and get an answer. Their central office was all dispersed. So we thought, right, we need to get out to all of these guys so they know, at least they've got something on their computer that they can turn to.
Yeah, absolutely. So to go back to the point you mentioned earlier, Greg, about communication, again, an important subject we try and talk about on the podcast. I know at the moment you guys are doing webinar content for clients, intermediaries, etc. Do you want to just talk us through what you're trying to achieve there and what the type of content that's on there?
Yeah, so we weren't doing webinars prior to lockdown, but we immediately knew that we weren't going to be able to get out on the road and to go and do those sort of trips where you have 8 meetings a day and go and see all of your sort of partners in different jurisdictions. So we thought a good way to do that would be to start a webinar series. So I had the unenviable task of being webinar host number 1 for Capital.
Webmaster. Yep.
We were 2 minutes before going live. So, when you're sat on the screen there waiting, and we had our marketing team behind the scenes going, we can't get you on stage live. So we ended up having to contact the host at the very last minute, and they said, "Oh yeah, no, that's a bug in the system. You wouldn't have been able to do anything about that." The first webinar very nearly didn't happen, but we were pleased that it did, and actually it covered. I think we had attendees on from Jersey, Guernsey, Switzerland, Monaco, Malta, Cayman, Bermuda, and South Africa, as well as the Isle of Man and UK. And that was kind of our objective, was to reach that larger audience that we've got internationally. That particular series that we're still doing was really focused on trustees and corporate service providers. And we covered initially just a look at the investment landscape and particularly how interest rates have been cut, how that had shifted the dynamics on returns across different asset classes. And then we did a follow-up session really looking at cash and fixed income, which are 2 strengths of Capital International. And last week we did one on ethical investing and sort of a focus on ESG that we've seen a lot of momentum back into now, and it's something that I was involved in 10 years ago, so it was an area that we wanted to cover. But that ability to communicate regularly and build up a little bit of a following, as I'm sure you're seeing in your podcast series, it's great when you can ask the audience what subject they want you to talk about. You can then put together sort of content from your team and the knowledge and experience that you've got, and it's a brilliant way to be able to share that. We've really enjoyed doing sort of little poll questions on there as well. So we set one for the ESG webinar where we were looking at BP, a company that just about every investor has had in their portfolio at some time, and the question was, can you include BP in an ESG portfolio, and sort of asking that question out to the audience and seeing what responses you get. And then we had a fun little panel debate with one of our managers, James Fitzpatrick, who we'll come back to because he's got an interesting story of migrating from South Africa to the Isle of Man during lockdown.
Oh, right.
He had the task of sort of saying, well, actually, BP are pivoting towards clean tech, and therefore they should be included in portfolios. And I took the somewhat easier case of saying, no, actually, you can never change your legacy as a BP, and actually everything they're doing, they're still reliant on fossil fuels, and therefore shouldn't be in an ethical portfolio. So it's a really nice forum to be able to set those sorts of questions and to have those sorts of discussions. And I think we'd love to be able to get back out and go and visit all of our partners in different jurisdictions. That's probably not going to happen for a little while yet. So the webinar series is a great way to keep in contact, and actually we've seen that base of contacts grow to about 700 that are on that webinar invite, and we're typically getting an audience of sort of 40 or 50 that are attending the webinars we're hosting. And then we've expanded it. David, you've hosted some webinars now as well, haven't you? Sort of more broadly outside of the investment offering that we've got, and I think that format is sort of working well.
Yeah, so, it was quite interesting that you started those. That you had a technical blip with yours at the start of yours. So that must be the first world challenge. My challenge was we had load shedding and they turned the lights off. So I had a little delay when mine started while our backup generator kicked in and all the lights came back on. So yeah, that was a bit of a baptism of fire when I did mine. We did ours on, we called it transition, the change in normal. We just talked about how do we do business going forward and what will business look like. But we also covered a hugely topical area on ours, which is situs. You know, you talk about 10 years ago, before Greg, 10 years ago when I was advising, we never talked about situs or the issues with situs or the impact of situs. And virtually every conversation I have with clients in South Africa, it's topical and they're asking about it. Where it wasn't an issue and they didn't think about it, it seems to be that everybody's talking about situs at the moment. So we thought it was topical to do that in our webinar and just kind of dispel some of the myths. That was the plan.
And they're available, let's call it the back catalogue of them for people that want to go and dig them out.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the good things about the webinars. I couldn't attend one of yours, Greg, but I listened to it later on because it's available just to listen to. I didn't want to watch you, Greg, because I know what you look like, but I did want to listen to it. You can be doing. You can if
you can hit the button, can't you? And then you're just listening. So you can't do that in a face-to-face meeting. You're stuck up.
So to pivot a little bit, David, I know you recently completed your Institute of Directors. So maybe just talk through your kind of motives for, obviously probably quite clearly but your motives for doing that and kind of the benefits you feel that people will get if that's something a route they wanted to explore.
So the reason initially was, obviously I've been a senior manager for a lot of my career, and I understood there's a big difference between a senior manager in a business and looking at it from an operational point of view than a director, and the responsibilities and the liabilities of being a director of a company, which I think a lot of people don't think about. Now, because I live in South Africa, I did the 1 week intensive course, and I must underline the word intensive. It is non-stop. I mean, by the Thursday, I was absolutely finished. You know, you start at 7 in the morning and you finish at 7 in the night, but you're learning so much. You're kind of all in. There was about 15 of us from around the world, so involved in it that you're enjoying it. But it was really hard and intense, but I did enjoy it. And then we kind of got there on the Sunday, and straight away we did governance and the role of the director. And the guy literally frightened the living daylights out of it by telling us, you know, this is what you're on the hook for now, you're all directors. He kind of went away that Sunday night thinking, oh my God, what have I done? Could have stayed as a senior manager. But, you know, the next day, I think he did it as a purpose to say, you know, this is what it's all about. But then it got, you know, further and further. Leadership and strategy, which I kind of do all the time and I'm heavily involved in, really enjoyed. My kind of Achilles heel was the finance part of it, and I was concerned that, you know, if you're sitting there and you've got a, you know, P&L in front of you and you want to understand it and maybe ask some questions, you've got to be confident in it, and that's why I wanted to do it. And I actually got a distinction on my finance paper, which I kind of believe. But yeah, really good. And also I came back and I spent time with our finance director, Paul Atherton, and said, look, this is what I've learned. Give me a bit of how you use it day to day. And it just opened me up to say, you know, at times we'll be in meetings and you don't want to ask the question because it might sound like a silly question. But as a director, whether a non-exec or not, you've got to ask them questions because you need to know, even if someone thinks it's a silly question or they've already answered it, until you're satisfied, ask the question. And that's kind of what really resonated with me, that you are liable, you are responsible, and you've got to take that. And you kind of wear two hats. You wear your managerial hat, and then you take that off, and then you put your director's hat on and look from a different viewpoint.
Yeah. It's interesting because I'm probably of the same makeup where I work with accountants and my co-directors are all accountants and I'm not. So I won't say at a disadvantage, but naturally your knowledge is a lot less, but there's that, you've got to be comfortable to ask the questions, even if you feel like they're dumb questions, or go and ask someone of the same level or even levels below you to educate you in areas where you need improvement. I think that's one of the things never to be scared of.
Yeah, that was one of the really good, the course I was on. You had FDs, you had CEOs, so you had a good mix. And one of the FDs says he had realised that he had to basically dumb down his presentations to his board,
right?
Because he was talking in accountancy language that your CIO would understand, but somebody like me, the commercial director, might not. And he realised he needed to actually change the language he was using. Because what he was finding, he was getting lots and lots of questions because they didn't understand the terminology or the words, rather than what he was actually saying.
Yeah.
So he changed his style on that, and just last week I was in one of our excos last week, and I actually picked a couple of points up on the P&L and the budget, saying you've made a mistake here, this is not right, this is going to impact there, and our chief investment officer went, "Wow, David, that course is really come in handy because from a commercial point of view, you're challenging everything."
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. And I guess you sell part of your own then development. That's just about becoming more rounded.
Yeah, I mean, from my past, when RDR came into the UK, I was living in South Africa, so I had to fly back to the UK and sit my exams, and I did that to get to level 4. And I got a real interest in studying and developing that side of things. So I continued, and I did 18 exams in 2.5 years and got the chartered and fellowship. And then obviously the next thing that I was interested in was the director's exams, because that was the space I was moving into. And I think you should never stop learning. I think, you learn on the job, but academically you should always learn as well, because you'll reap the rewards in the future.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. And to talk more about studying, we go back to university days, Greg, then and now in your job, you travel the world and talk about cultures. Perhaps just talk to us a bit about, because that's, again, I've not traveled a lot in work, but again, knowing cultures is so important to, one, develop relationships and then build business.
Yeah, and I think it's the way that you communicate in different places with different people, and I think part of that is actually around the sort of investment language you use as well. So just picking up on David's point there, I think everyone that's in more of a business development role at Capital is also investment qualified, and one of the things that I sort of through my career have sort of seen that you need to understand the language of the people that you're working with. So I spend most of my time working with trustees. So I'm now doing the step qualifications. So we kind of get a better understanding of really what their issues and challenges are. I think, there is generally from a sort of a ethnographic perspective that business is different in different jurisdictions. There's often a lot of common background. So we were talking about it before you started recording, just sort of sport in different jurisdictions. I mean, if you're chatting about cricket to someone in the Caribbean, you've got that common background there. If you've got more of an awareness of what their cultural background is, then you've got a better chance of having a better conversation with them, I think, and understanding what the challenges are. I think sometimes some cultures are just so different to your own. The only way to really to be able to conduct business is by participant observation, by actually going there and finding out what it's like. In a previous role, I've helped sort of build a book of business in Sao Paulo, and somewhere I'd always had an interest in, but somewhere I'd never been. So it was only after sort of 6 or 7 trips that you really start to get a better understanding of what makes the place tick from a business perspective. But all the guys that you're meeting and their backgrounds, I find that really interesting. I think the Isle of Man is an international jurisdiction, and I think I suppose my time's a lot of the time's been spent either on other islands or in enclaves, if you like, and it's a very different world to the onshore world. And I think that's something that you have to be able to translate, thinking not only from sort of maybe a UK or European perspective, but maybe from an emerging market perspective as well.
Yeah.
And then relate that to, well, how am I going to deal with the Isle of Man team here that perhaps think a little bit more from an island perspective. And we'll see that when we're talking about different types of business that is being attracted to capital, being able to understand why they're doing it and what they're doing, and then being able to open an account for them. I think that's part of the journey that capital's on. I mean, we're very well known in the Isle of Man and in South Africa, but up until the last sort of year or so, Capital International was fairly unfamiliar as an international institution. So that's sort of been the journey for the last year, which has really been a sort of a continuation of sort of the last 7 or 8 years. That
it's an interesting link between those last two discussions as well, because you look from a board perspective where a new business person's saying here's an opportunity in a location. But we all talk about often going, certainly if you're traveling, to build relationships over time, but knowing the culture to then sit in front of the board and say, look, the reality is it's going to take me 6 or 7 trips, not only to build relationships because of these cultural differences. So again, that communication as well as knowing that the culture dynamics there, or starting to understand them, that these things might take more time than perhaps the board expect, which obviously then feeds into forecasts and budgets, etc., and expectations, business expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've kind of almost gone in a slightly different direction, I suppose, to David, who's had a nice sort of progression up and is now at the director level. I became a director of a licensed institution about 7 years ago. So I had a stint of being on boards, and yes, I enjoyed it, but I actually decided I wanted my focus to be more on the investment side and out working and engaged with clients.
Yeah.
Not that I won't go back to directorship at some stage, but it's funny how your career progresses from role to role.
Well, that'll help you, because you kind of, in your role as it stands today, is I know what these guys are thinking about and need to think about, and therefore you can communicate that to them.
And from clients' perspective as well, we deal with a lot of business owners, so understanding what they're trying to achieve and just saying, right, okay, well, if you've got a structure, and we had one recently where the structure had a federation in it. It was in Asia. It was there was an Isle of Man CSP, and there was requirements at different levels within the structure, and an investment element as well. And I think if you haven't sort of built the experience of understanding what clients are trying to achieve in different jurisdictions, it would be very difficult to try and take a prospective bit of new business to our high risk committee or to our board to try and open something up. So I think they're the interesting bits for us. And I know you want to sort of move on to it a little bit, but we've kind of we've got a team that's very outward looking in terms of being able to write business, and I think hopefully that's a bit of an antidote on the investment and the cash management side and treasury side to sort of the trend we've seen over the last 5-6 years, where it's very difficult for clients and trustees and corporate service providers to open accounts. And I think it's a very simple point, but we want to understand what you're doing, and then if we accept your business premise for what you want to do, then we want to be able to open an account for you.
Yeah. So perhaps just to cover off a final point around, I know again it's been a long process for you guys when you talk about the Isle of Man, the banking license, that process. So if we kind of maybe a quick potted history of where that went to and where you're at right now. And I suppose the one thing is, again, as an observer of the business, is that it felt, or it feels like from the outside, that again, that was something customers were asking for and looking for, and therefore that was one of the main drivers to go down that route of getting that license.
I'll give you my take on it from when I joined Capital. So I joined Capital, I started conversations end of 2016 and joined 2017 when I moved back to South Africa from Jersey. And I kind of worked for a big bank all my life, been involved in it. And one of my last roles for this bank was closing down their international jurisdictions. So I closed down the US, Canada, Mauritius, all of Africa, apart from South Africa, to name but a few, and most of Latin America, basically everywhere where capital does business now. And a lot of these were CSPs, TSPs that we'd had for a long time where we just didn't have the risk appetite. And then when I knew that we were looking to launch a bank, and this was a space that we found, it resonated with me because I'd actually been on the other side of it, saying to these clients, sorry, we don't want you anymore. And I'm thinking, well, I know if we're one company doing that and everybody else is doing similar, there's a huge vacuum being created that somebody like Capital, who is nimble, who has a can-do attitude, can step in there. And that, for me, this business wasn't risky or high-risk business. It was quality, long-standing business that the head office had made a decision that they weren't interested in anymore. And it kind of, from somebody that had built that business from scratch, it kind of hurt. Yeah, and that's why I really wanted to get involved with Capital, and especially from a South African point of view, because a lot of them move their money offshore, want to have somebody to hold it for them, and it's kind of longer term in a trust, in a CSP or whatever it may be. Yeah. And that was the key driver for me joining Capital. That one, we were looking to build the bank, and two, we were looking to grow in South Africa because I knew the importance of that.
Yeah. And at the moment, Greg, from an Arman perspective, that process, I know you're building a lot of work going on in the background in regard to the client interaction as well. Where are you as a business with that? And again, I mentioned we're at mid-August at the moment, 2020.
Yeah, so the provisional license was granted in the summer of 2019, and since then we've been building all of the infrastructure. A lot of that has been IT development work, and we've got over 30 people in our IT dev team that really have built the digital hub, which will be the main sort of portal for clients. And at the moment, we're at the sort of final stages of testing that the whole system works, and we've sort of employed people to try and break the system and to see what bugs and faults there might be in there. And I think there has been sort of a little bit of a test of patience for the team, because we know we've got this awesome new offering, but we can't quite get it out to market yet. So subject to sort of how things go in the next month or so. At the moment, it's sort of penciled in for the doors opening in December. Initially for existing treasury clients that will become the first banking clients, and then subsequently for sort of wider new clients. I think it's worth sort of just reiterating the length of the journey and the commitment that Capital have had to getting the banking license, and actually if we have to wait another month or so, the market is still going to be there, and that point you've made it, and David kind of alluded to, is that I think Capital's had the foresight to see the direction that a lot of the industry is going in, and actually if we can be there to be able to provide those services to institutions and clients that are getting closure letters from elsewhere, then we know that we've got a really good opportunity to build a very good, solid bank on the Isle of Man. And it's not just the Isle of Man. I mean, we see it in Jersey, Guernsey, Gibraltar, Malta. All of the islands and over in the Caribbean as well are struggling to have fairly simple banking services provided. And that's really where Capital comes into its own.
No, for being in the CSP, TSP background, that's very much an ongoing challenge. And again, as an observer, not because you guys are on the call now, but as an outsider, again, although you can see the amount of time and funds being invested to ultimately service clients, which I think, again, as an observer, in regard to your business, it's a massive commitment, but must give clients such comfort that you're around. You're not just stagnant. You want to grow, offer more to clients, and more service levels, more products, more. Yeah. So that just, again, just shows, to me, again, as an observer, a very clear vision that the business has.
And then you see that a lot of good clients of CSPs and TSPs almost being closed out of the market, really. And every time, if you go to Switzerland and you'll talk to trustees there, they'll say, well, I did have an account with this private bank, but they've just put their minimum up to 10 million or 20 million. They're good clients with good structures that have maybe been there for 20, 30 years. And then often a trustee will be left with nowhere to go, or they'll get that letter through that says you've got 3 months to find a new provider. So I think that's the space that you'll see capital growing into once the doors are open.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because I signed them letters and I built them relationships, and I started, in Mauritius. I did lots of trusts in Mauritius while advising in South Africa, and then moved to Jersey. And kind of 2-3 years later, I was the person signing them letters to say, here's your notice period, I'm sorry. So they're kind of thinking, hold on a minute, he was our advisor 5 years ago who set this up for me. Now as the senior manager, he's closing. But it wasn't me that made that decision, obviously. I think touching on your point regarding the development and the tech, that's also multi-jurisdictional. We've got 9 software developers in our office in Cape Town also. So we realise that it doesn't just have to be on the island. If we can get skill sets from elsewhere, and they speak every single day, because I see them in the offices. And it just shows you that we are committed, and fintech is part of the future, and we understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. So for listeners that want to reach out, perhaps start with you, Greg, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you, connect with you?
Probably either to book in for a Teams call, or if you're based on the Isle of Man, we can get out and we can do a coffee. But yeah, I'm sure Martin will provide sort of contact details, email and telephone number, and LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, I can drop that.
LinkedIn's a good point at the moment. If you've used your LinkedIn profile well over the last 10 years, then actually it's been a whole nother forum to be able to have discussions with people you might not speak to on a regular basis. But actually during lockdown, we've been able to communicate with them and see how they're doing as businesses and see what we can do with them.
We'll add a note in the show notes there then, and assume for the same for yourself, if that's all right, David. Put your LinkedIn profile. I assume you're good for people to.
Yeah, certainly do. Use it a lot. Use LinkedIn. Unfortunately, won't be able to go for the coffee because I'm still on a bit of a lockdown.
Zoom.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time today, guys. It's been really interesting and good to dig in. Thank you again.
No, thank you, Martin. Really pleased to join you, and we'll see you again very soon.
Cheers. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, guys. Keep well.
Thanks, David. Cheers.
Yes.
Thanks for listening, everyone.